Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, if you remember from last week, we talked about the great companion Umar ibn al-Khattab embracing Islam. As some have said, that was days just after Hamza also accepted Islam, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. And with that, in particular, Umar, if just for a moment, things were beginning to improve for the Muslim community. And with their newfound strength and honor, which was brought by Umar, radiyallahu anhu, by his presence among the ranks of the faithful, many of the Muslims were now looking to go public and to step out from the shadows, if you will. In fact, what was happening in Abyssinia with this and several events to come shortly thereafter, they were actually rethinking their presence, and some of them were wanting to return back home. Umar, as you know, this great, brave, courageous man, was simply unsatisfied now that he was Muslim to sit back and watch the idolaters confidently and comfortably worship their false gods, while the Muslims, many of whom were in hiding, could not enjoy the same freedoms. You know, Mecca was a place of idolatry, once a place of monotheism, a house erected for the sake of Allah by Ibrahim and his son, alayhi salam. It was once a symbol of pure tawheed. And now the idolaters, they had filled it up with their own idols and surrounded it with false gods. And they were defiling the very structure that they venerated. And Umar had embraced and understood the true nature of Allah's faith. So he was terribly dissatisfied with the fact that the people of true faith had to stay in hiding and couldn't go out and pray by the Kaaba, while the idolaters, they walked around as if it was normal, as if they were in the right. And so he started praying in public. Umar ibn al-Khattab, he started to pray in public. You know, sometimes when evil becomes prevalent, when it becomes popular, it can be perceived by many as truth. When evil becomes prevalent, becomes popular, it's perceived by many as truth. That's just what is. That's just the norm. That's just how it goes. Sometimes we don't even question it. You don't have any feelings about it either. It's just part of the way the world works. Our world works like that, and it's the status quo. And it takes a keen eye to see the difference between the two. And that was the eye of Umar. He was able to see that. It's like, look, something's wrong here. Why is it that we have to be in hiding while they get to enjoy this type of public life? And he wanted to change that perception. He was going to change it through action. And you know, changing an evil with the hand is far better than simply holding a feeling of hatred towards it in the heart. And that's what he set out to do, along with Hamza radiyallahu anhum. They would go out into the sanctuary. They would go out there and they would establish prayer in front of the Kaaba. And at times they would take with them other Muslims that wanted to be free. They wanted to feel free to worship Allah. And so in the accompaniment of Umar and Hamza, they would go out and they would pray in front of the Kaaba. And because of their presence, these two giants of faith, the Quraysh, they just refused to do anything about it. They really couldn't do anything. They knew that if they pushed the issue, that Umar would strike back. And it would erupt into violence. And it would be, of course, to the detriment of the Quraysh. Umar was very persistent. He was resolute in the fact that this was going to happen. And so what they did, so as not to appear to be defeated, they would simply just walk away They would leave the scene so they didn't have to sit there and be humiliated and belittled by the fact that now Umar ibn Khattab, who was once their champion, their strong arm, was out there defending the faith and standing up for prayer in public, standing up for the Prophet ﷺ, standing up for the faith of Allah. And things were also working out for the Prophet ﷺ. Our beloved Prophet ﷺ enjoyed a great deal of comfort which was provided by way of his uncle Abu Talib. But now at this point, with the momentum that the Muslim community was gaining, the entire clan of Banu Hashim agreed that they would all defend the Prophet ﷺ. The Muslims as well as the non-Muslims of that clan. They all band together and said, we will defend and stand behind the Prophet ﷺ, whether they believed he was a prophet or not. And they were going to protect him from his detractors. And for the Quraysh, this was another blow. It was another defeat. The Islam of Hamza and Umar, the prophets, increased tribal protection, and the return of their emissaries from Abyssinia empty-handed. They came back rejected by Najashi. And this was all too much for the Quraysh, the idolaters, to live with. And so they decided to rethink their strategy. Up until this point, it was kind of throwing insults. It was using violence. And nothing would break the spirit of the Muslim community. And so now they're going to try something new. And so they gathered together and they called all the heads of the clans to figure out what would be the next step. Look, we need to change our strategy. You know, when things aren't working, you have to regroup, rethink. There's a goal we have to get to. Plan A didn't work. We got to find out what plan B is. And so with Abu Jahl at the helm of the operation, they decided to boycott the entire clans of both Banu Hashim and Banu Abdul Muttalib. And there was over 40 people that signed a pledge that they would not marry their women, buy or sell from them, or socialize with them in any way until those two clans surrendered the Prophet ﷺ to be killed. They figured, we will boycott them, and through economic pressure, Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib will bring the Prophet to us and surrender him over, because we will just starve them out. And so in the 7th year of the mission, in the month of Al-Muharram, the pledge that was signed by all of these leaders was hung in the Kaaba. That's where they took it. It's the irony of that. A house built by a prophet hung inside of there in order to kill a prophet. And they hung it there, and the boycott began. And the two clans were essentially forced to gather together to pool their resources, and they ended up in the neighborhood of Abu Talib, or in his on his property. And that's how Mecca was kind of arranged, with these neighborhoods of different clans. And so they were all kind of made to go and live over there with Abu Talib. And there was about 200 of them. 200 men, women, and children. It's like over 40 men, and the rest of them were women and children. And so, to make matters worse, the idolaters, what they would do when the caravans would come into the city bringing goods and foods, etc., they would race out there to them, and they would buy them out at high, exorbitant prices in order to prevent the Prophet and his followers from having access to food from outside. Because remember, they're not buying and selling. So they're going to run out of resources internally within those two clans. And the other clans aren't going to sell them food or clothes or whatever. And then the outside traders, when they come in, they're not going to allow them to buy from them either. So now they're just watching the clock, hoping it's going to run out pretty soon for these two tribes. And guess what? They began to starve. They began to starve. And they could hear the cries of the women and children behind the walls of Abu Talib's, of his community. And the little bit of food that they did get, they would get some here and there, a little bit of food and a little bit of clothes, a little bit of goods, were brought by people who, from the outside, began to feel sorry for them. Which meant that even though those 40-some leaders signed that pledge, not all of them were 100% resolved as to what they were doing was the right thing. They weren't able to button up all of the loose ends of the greater Meccan community, so food did get through here and there. They weren't totally destitute, but it just wasn't enough to satisfy. One of the companions said that it got so bad, the starvation that they went through and the hunger, he said, one night I went outside and I stepped on something moist. I picked it up, I put it in my mouth, and I swallowed it until this very day. I have no idea what it was. That's how bad the hunger was. And there were other similar stories of the desperation of the companions during this time. But no one turned over the Prophet ﷺ. That's all they had to do was give him up. And no one moved a muscle. They persisted and they remained patient through these types of trials. The name calling was stopped now. I mean, they still, whenever the Prophet ﷺ would come around, they would take the opportunity to belittle him and dishonor him. However, that was not as bad as the boycott. And the Prophet ﷺ continued to preach. He continued to teach, and he would even go out during the busy seasons in the Meccan society, like the days of Hajj, and he would speak to the pilgrims. He would continue on, and the Muslim community, they continued on. And this lasted for 3 years. Can you imagine that? 3 years? You know, we enjoy a great deal. We live in abundance. You know, and it's something to be grateful for, that we're not worried about opening the cupboard, opening the pantry, and finding it's just empty. Many of us actually, our refrigerators get so full with leftovers, we end up throwing half of it or more in the trash because of the abundance that we enjoy. We have no idea, a lot of us, what that looks like. And the desperation that comes with it. And so, around the end of the 3rd year, eventually, the boycott came to an end, and that was out of pure sympathy, especially the other clans that had relatives that were being boycotted. So a few men from the opposing side of the idolaters, including Zuhair ibn Umayyah and others, they decided to stand up against the leaders of the Quraysh and demand that they end the boycott. And Zuhair, he addressed his people and he began to complain about the pledge and the oppression that it contained. The things that they were made to agree to and sign, they were no longer satisfied with or could live with themselves, watching their tribesmen starve. Of course, there was pushback by Abu Jahl. He stood up and tried to keep them strong. However, Al-Mut'im ibn Adi, who was among that small group that wanted to stand up, they had thought it through and they had planned it out. One after the other of 5 men stood up and began to argue and dispute with Abu Jahl. Al-Mut'im, he goes into the Kaaba. He's going to get the pledge, bring it out in front of everybody and rip it into shreds. The only problem with that was when he got in there, he found that it had been eaten, the pledge, by insects. It had already been destroyed. And the only thing that remained of that paper was the very beginning, which they wrote, Bismika Allahumma, in your name, O Allah. That's how they started their pledge. And that was the only thing that they could read. And when they saw him come out with that, they took that as a huge sign. Because that's who the prophet was calling to. He was calling people to Allah. And to find that pledge they hung in the Kaaba, the house of Allah, they had not gone in to alter or to damage it, to change it, in 3 years was now destroyed. And because of that, they all got together, overpowered Abu Jahl and his cronies, and ended the boycott. And yet again, the Quraysh, the idolaters, took a loss and were humiliated by Allah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضاه. نصلي ونسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. So, I want to draw your attention to a possible connection between the actions of Umar ibn al-Khattab and the boycott. You know, as I mentioned, momentum was beginning to build for the Muslim community. It was building in the favor of the Prophet ﷺ and his mission. And what Umar did by going out and praying in public and bringing a number of the Muslims out from Darul Arqam and from their homes to pray in public, it could have likely been the straw which broke the camel's back. It could have been just enough that the Quraysh, they snapped. They realized things weren't working, and they had to re-strategize. I mean, you know, taking prayer outside, public display of faith, it's a huge statement. And during that time, it was an assertion of identity, and it still is today. Public displays of affection, of faith, of anything, when you do it so people can see, it's an assertion of your identity. This is who I am. This is who we are. It's very powerful. Public stance like that, what it says is, we won't back down, we won't hide, and we won't be defeated. That's what Omar was getting at. You're not going to brush us under the rug and push us into the closet and leave us in the dark. You know, minority groups and oppressed people, they need such bravery. They need this type of bravery to secure their place in the world. Courage is required. And sacrifices have to be made. And one might argue, looking at the boycott and the starving women and children, one might argue that, well, it really wasn't all that bad before. I mean, they were better off before the boycott, right? I mean, they were able to pray. They were in private. I mean, they were getting, you know, they were being called names, and some of them were physically harmed and abused. There were maybe a couple that lost their life, but not for the cost of the entire community. Just pray at home. Just don't make waves. Just, you know, don't disturb the status quo. It's not worth it. A person may argue. They may take that stance. Like, it's just too hard. I mean, do we really have to go through this exercise? If we're to carve out a place for ourselves in our own communities, we have to be willing to demand at times our own rights. Take them if necessary, without fear of reprisal. If we constantly cower in the shadows, afraid to step out into the light as people of faith, we will forever live a gloomy and depressed existence. We will never feel free. We have to have pride of faith. You know, everyone else around us is proud of their thing. Everyone else is proud of their thing, of what they do. You know, last night was a reminder of that. Highly commercialized and highly evolved ritual of pagan, Celtic, and Catholic origins. You know, talking about Halloween, of course. And it was believed that on October 31, at the end of the harvest, this was believed by, you know, people in Europe, the Irish, after the end of the harvest, that the ghosts of the dead walked the earth, October 31. That's what they used to believe. And they would light these huge bonfires. And They would conceal their identities by wearing masks or costumes in order to drive away evil spirits. And so today our little kiddies, they dress up in masks and costumes, and we have them walk around the neighborhoods. You know, early in the Catholic Church, when they eventually took over that area, you know, they went into Europe and they basically colonized those pagans because, yeah, white people were pagans. That's right, at one point. The Europeans, most of them were pagans. They worshiped many gods. And so the Catholic Church, they went into Europe and they began to Christianize that part of the world. And in order to do that, they would intertwine the pagan holidays with Christian holidays, kind of like, you know, to sell them on the idea, look, you don't have to change a whole lot. In fact, you can keep your stuff. We just got to make a few innovations, some bid'ah here and there. And the next thing you know, it's as comfortable as it was before. Now you just call yourself Christians and we change the way you think a little bit and what you do and what you say. And we can add to our numbers and our power. They intertwined a holiday of their own called Hallowmas. And that has to do with the saints and the martyrs that died of the Christian faith. The churches in Britain, what they would do is they would send supplicants, people that would pray. They would send them door to door. And they would ask the people of the homes to say, look, if you give us a small gift, we'll make dua, basically. We'll pray for your dead. They would ask for a small gift to take back to the church. And then in turn, they would pray for the dead. And so today what we do is we send the little kiddies out and we have them knock on the door to get candy. A small gift. You see how it's evolved. I mean, we don't understand that. We lost the connection there. The history is not a favorite subject here in the United States. We'd rather not know about what we did in the past or where things came from. It's just all commercial right now. It's all in the name of good fun. We see it in the stores. It's in the schools, places of work. It's our neighborhoods. And for some of us, it's crept into our own homes. And if we don't take part in it, you know what? It's a big challenge. If you don't take part in these things, depending on your social circle, you're considered strange or extreme. You're weirdos. You know, I can remember the first time, this is before Islam, so bear with me. This is before I accepted Islam. This is back in the high school days. I can remember the first time I came across one of these I don't celebrate Halloween types. And I thought it was the strangest thing I'd ever heard. Mr. Ayandoli was his name. He was one of my teachers. He was a Jewish man that had moved into our area. And during one of the breaks, we were chatting about, it was Halloween, of course, and I was asking him, you know, he had already told me he had kids, etc., etc. I said, so what are your kids dressing up for on Halloween? And he said, well, look, we don't celebrate Halloween. Jewish guy. He's not Muslim, so don't worry about it. He said, we don't celebrate Halloween. And that his kids wouldn't be going out to get candy that night. He said, we don't even give candy out at our house. We just turn the light off and we put a little note or something on the door. Because I was so confident in what I was doing, going trick-or-treating, I found it to be the most odd thing I'd come across that year. I even told him that he was denying his kids candy and fun. I remember it. Here I am, you know. What would you expect from a godless teenager with a sweet tooth and a propensity for mischief? Just want to go out, have fun, get free candy, and do some tricks. And I'm arguing with this adult, this grown man. Look, you're denying your kids free candy and fun. I never, ever at that time considered the possibility that maybe Mr. Ayandoli was a man of God. Maybe he had principles that prevented him from indulging in such things, regardless how unpopular that would be. And you know what? The crazy thing about all that, I don't remember the name of the trick-or-treaters that I went out with. I don't remember the homes that I visited. I don't remember the kids that I came across. I don't remember the tricks or the pranks that we did. But I do remember Mr. Ayandoli. I do remember him. Mr. Ayandoli had an impact Now, at the time, it was hard to swallow, but it's lasted through the years. That's what we need to do, this community. On an individual and a communal level, is we need to make an impact. And it takes courage. You know, it's the type of courage that people remember. It's the type of courage of Umar ibn Khattab to go out there in public and pray and bring with him every Muslim that he could to make an impact. And guess what? Our children will remember our courage. They'll remember that courage. They may not understand it in their younger years when, you know, they have a sweet tooth and a propensity for mischief, but they will be proud of that as they grow older. Regardless of the choices they make when they become adults. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that they will remember that we had the courage of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and we were willing to take prayer outside. They will remember that we had the courage to employ the same tactic that the Quraysh did once to the Muslims and boycott that which is in direct opposition to who we are as people of God. They will remember that we were brave enough to make the sacrifices needed to worship Allah and call the people to His way, as our Prophet ﷺ and his companions did through those 3 hard years of hunger and discomfort. Not only will they remember that, but they will learn about such bravery. They will learn about bravery and honor. They will learn that man kana yuridu al-izzata falillahi al-izzatu jami'an. That whoever seeks honor and power, then let him know that all honor and power belong to Allah. إِلَيْهِ يَسْعَدُ الْكَلِمُ الطَّيِّبُ وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ. To Him alone, good words ascend and righteous deeds are raised up by Him. وَالَّذِينَ يَمْكُرُونَ السَّيِّئَاتِ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ شَدِيدٌ وَمَكْرُ أُولَٰئِكَ هُوَ يَبُورٌ. And they will learn that as for those who plot evil, they will suffer a severe punishment. And the plotting of such people is doomed to fail. Brothers and sisters, regardless the price that we pay, regardless the plots of the wicked, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set it up in such a way that the righteous will always be victorious. That's the way Allah has set it up. There's no other way. It's either you're going to be on the winning side or you're going to be on the losing side. It's either you're going to be on the field with the winners. You can't just stand up in the stands and watch. Allah set it up so that the righteous will always be victorious. Now that victory may be given to you in this life, and if it's not, lakumul jannah, paradise is yours. And let that be an encouragement, those types of stories. Let that be an encouragement to all you sisters that are here. Or you wear your hijab out in public in pride. And you gentlemen amongst us that when it's time for prayer, you stop your work. You stop at the job and you pray wherever you need to. Let that be an encouragement for the parents as they continue to set good standards, even if it's unpopular among their kids. Even if their kids are crying and begging, wait, we want, we need, we have to, everyone's doing it, and you say, whoa, whoa. We have to be strong right now. We have to be brave. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you as you fight the good fight here, because that's really what it is. It's a struggle, it's a fight. You have to find the courage. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with that courage and to give us the resolve so that we can go the distance, that He guide our hearts to that which He loves and is pleased with. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.